Amazing Spider-Man 2 was the last movie that Sony put out before they made a deal with the MCU to resurrect Spider-Man in Civil War. The movie came out in 2014 and I only saw the movie once. And the first time I saw it, I really did not like it. In some parts of the country, it's called the Rise of Electro. And that's the story here, is that Electro, upset that Spider-Man doesn't remember him, okay, is trying to seek revenge, and he's not the only one on the web slinger. The movie came out in 2014, directed by Mark Webb, and this is my first time watching the movie since it first came out. Yeah, I have really mixed opinions on this film. Because there are things about this movie I really, really enjoyed. And then there's things that I felt were just really botched and terrible. Like, this movie, it reminds me a lot of Spider-Man 3 in that when I first started watching it, I was kind of getting into it. In fact, I'm going to say this right now. The first, like, third of this movie, I think the first act of this movie, I like it way more than Amazing Spider-Man. In fact, I may like it more than Spider-Man 3. It was probably my favorite first act. The early run-in that Spider-Man has with Rhino before he becomes Rhino, and all the stuff that happens in the first act, like the graduation with Gwen Stacy, and his first meeting ever with Max Dillon. Like, all that stuff was good. Like, I actually really enjoyed that. And the movie had this really optimistic feel to it. Unlike the previous movie that I thought had a really darker tone, which isn't always a bad thing, but you really don't want the first film to always have a dark tone. But maybe sometimes you do. It depends on your direction. I thought this had a much better feel to it. And there are things that I liked. I mean, there's just things about that first act that I liked. You know, one thing I also liked about the movie is that it did continue the story from the first Amazing Spider-Man about Peter trying to find out about his parents. Because there's this whole mystery in the Amazing Spider-Man movies about his parents, how they tie into Oscorp, what the backstory is, and a lot of that is answered here in this film. So you kind of do need to watch Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2. Maybe not quite back to back, but relatively close to each other so you can get the full aspect of the story. Now, like I said, I was getting into the story, but there's just things about this movie that really, really bother me. First of all, Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn. Dude, I did not like this character. Harry Osborn was so damn annoying in this movie. And I'm talking about not just when he was Green Goblin, just Harry Osborn early in the film has this, like, annoying emo punk kid look to him that I just, every time he was on screen, I wanted him to get off the screen. Like, even when he was a good guy, it was terrible. And when he actually becomes the Green Goblin near the end of the movie, that look, oh, dude, this is, I mean, people criticize the Willem Dafoe Green Goblin from Spider-Man 1. This Green Goblin was an embarrassment. Like, I've seen Nickelodeon cartoons from the 90s. I'm sorry, not cartoons. Nickelodeon live-action shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark have more terrifying outfits. Like, the Green Goblin looks like a joke in this movie, bro. He's horrible. Horrible. Did not like that at all. I did like some of the stuff with Jamie Foxx. I liked him early on. I thought his vendetta against Spider-Man was really dumb and just pointless. Now, that being said, though, one thing I'll say I did like about the movie is some of the shots in the movie are just beautiful. Some of the fights with Jamie Foxx, with Electro and Spider-Man were outstanding. The fight at the end with the electricity and Spider-Man's like swinging around and the way the camera work was done. The camera work in this film, I think, is probably, I would say Mark Webb is probably better at doing action shots than Sam Raimi. Now, that might be the point of debate. If you want to debate me on that, that's fine. But I feel like as far as having the web slinger and his action movements, the way they follow the camera like behind him in that third-person view, I think Mark Webb did great. I think if you haven't seen this movie in a long time and you watch it now, you'll appreciate some of the things he did with Spider-Man. There's a lot of good stuff with Spider-Man in this film. And also, I gotta say that I do like the chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. They do have a ton of chemistry. The stuff with their relationship I actually really enjoyed. And then when she died at the end, which it's weird because when I first saw this movie, I thought it was Whiplash from the web that Spider-Man shoots to try to catch her from falling. But that wasn't the case. She actually hit her head on the ground. You know, I didn't even realize that. That's what killed her. I never picked up on that. But Very tragic death. Maybe it could have been a bit better executed, but it's a lot closer to the comics than, you know, really anything that's been portrayed outside of the comics. So, I mean, they got that from the Spider-Man comics. So that was, I did appreciate that, you know, and just the fact that Gwen's dad, like that whole story about how Gwen's dad told Peter, stay away and keep Gwen out of this. And he, you know, his love just, it was sad, bro. Because, like, that actually got me emotional. Not like crying, but I mean, I felt it because that was really kind of a sad story that this dude, you know, promised her dad to keep her out of it. And at one point, you know, he does try to keep her out of it. But, you know, they break up and then they get back together because he realizes, like, there's always reasons for us not to be together. But screw it, I want to be with you, which I can relate to that, bro. This movie should be called Spider-Man Close to Home. You know what I'm saying? Because I can really relate to that. I mean, damn. And so when she died, and then they cut to, like, the grave, like, this dude has been really in the middle of two members of her family dying. And it was really a tough thing. The middle of the movie kind of drags a bit, honestly. There are some absolutely horrible scenes in this movie that I thought were just terrible. I mean, this movie, I think, is a waste of Paul Giamatti's talent. Paul Giamatti playing Rhino, you know, he comes up with that hammy accent, which he said he loved to do, and he was playing this over-the-top villain, which is exactly what he was doing. And actually, I liked the end of the movie. I know that was supposedly Andrew Garfield's idea, how the little kid confronts Rhino, which it's a tiny bit too comic booky, but it's fine, because that's what this movie is. And then the real Spider-Man shows up because he realized he can't just stop being Spider-Man because Gwen died. He has a duty. You know, and that was a good ending. At first, I thought it was a bit iffy, honestly, that ending, but watching it, you know, was a very good ending. Now, again, we have another tease for a movie that never happened, which is the Sinister Six. We saw Gustav Fiers, the gentleman, in the post-credit scene of Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 1, and then we see him here, and that was supposed to be teasing the Sinister Six film, which supposedly would have been Amazing Spider-Man 3. And there was all kinds of talk of what they were going to do in that movie, but it wound up never happening because Amazing Spider-Man 2 was so not well received. I mean, the movie made money, but it was just not very well received. And, I mean, some would call it a flop. Some would call it a flop. And they pretty much took these old ideas for spin-offs and just kind of changed everything around and decided to move away from the Garfield universe, but they're obviously coming back to it in Spider-Man No Way Home, supposedly. But there's also a rumor that they're going to be doing more amazing. Like, there's a rumor that's been going around that after No Way Home comes out, they're going to do Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew Garfield. I don't know if that's true. Who knows? That might be BS, but the movie does feel like a sequel, a legitimate sequel to Amazing Spider-Man in that it continues kind of Peter's journey. You know, it actually, you know, and it's a good sequel as far as it tying into the first movie, but there's just so many problems. You know, Harry Osborn is very unlikable. Max Dillon, like, again, the effects were like he looks so weird as Electro with like the blue and everything. He just looks really, really strange as Electro. And his powers, though, in the fights with him and Spider-Man, the scene when they're like in the middle of the streets and he's like, "Do you remember me?" He's like, "Yeah." Like that whole thing, I like that scene. And the stuff, like, I feel like in this movie, I hate to say it, but Andrew was a lot better. Like, I thought that he had kind of settled into the character a bit more. You know, I thought that he was more comfortable, I think, as Peter Parker. And I thought the Spider-Man character was a step up from the previous movie. So there's people out there that think that Amazing Spider-Man 2 is better than 1, and I can understand why. I really can understand why. I think more happens in this movie than in the first one. I think the acting and the chemistry between the actors is better, but I think that Harry Osborn and the Electro backstory just kind of holds the movie down. Dude, that Green Goblin in this movie was so bad. Like, it was so embarrassingly bad. I couldn't get over it. And then at the end, the Rhino having a giant suit, like, it's one of those things where, like, obviously it's not the Rhino from the comics. I would have preferred just him being the Rhino from the comics. They had to make it more technological, and they did the tease for the Sinister Six and this and that. But I don't know, man. It just didn't. It felt like a bad adaptation. Like, everything with the Rhino at the end felt like a bad adaptation, and it's too bad because, I wonder how the Sinister Six story would have played out. I really do wonder that. Also, something I did not like about this movie is that it's almost implied that Spider-Man was destined to become Spider-Man because Peter Parker's parents, well, mostly his dad, that the serum was meant to work only on somebody of his blood. That's what I interpreted from it. So it's almost like Spider-Man was destined to be Spider-Man. And I don't like that because that's not how Spider-Man was. The whole thing is that the radioactive spider bites him and he becomes a hero that he doesn't really know how to be a hero at first. And that's the story of Spider-Man from Amazing Fantasy 15 that we saw in the Raimi movies and even in the first movie of this series. But here it's almost like they're saying he was destined to be Spider-Man, like a legendary hero. And I don't like that because that's just not Spider-Man. That's not the story. That's not the story of Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. So that, and again, when you're adapting a comic book, you can make changes, but I think you have to keep certain things. You have to keep certain things close to home because the character and the way the character behaves has to coincide with these things that you keep close to home. And I feel like that was a big error. Now, I will say, back on the side of things I did like, Hans Zimmer, great soundtrack for this movie. Junkie XL also did music for this film. I mean, the movie's got a ton of people doing the music. I thought Hans Zimmer in this soundtrack was great. There's some really, really great themes in this movie. This movie has way better music than the first Amazing Spider-Man film, and I thought it was better action sequences, but it's just, oh God, all of the Harry Osborn stuff is just stuff that I want to skip. I just want to skip it. Like, I don't want to watch it. It really annoys me. I don't want to. It makes me not want to see the movie, honestly. I think it's just like with Spider-Man 3. If they had cut, because I mentioned in that review, they had cut the Venom stuff out and focused on Sandman, it would have been a better movie. Here, if they had cut all the Green Goblin stuff out, and I know they had to do it because they felt like having Gwen Stacy die would lead to a third film and all that. I get all that, but and it's weird because on the Wikipedia entry for the movie, it says that the sudden stop before the landing breaks her spine. But it looked like she hit her head, dude, in this version. Maybe, I don't know, it's one of those two. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I know they had to go with that, right? But they didn't have to go with that. They could have done that, with Electro or something else. They didn't have to do that, or maybe save it for a third film. Maybe, for all we know, maybe Emma Stone didn't want to come back. I mean, who knows? Who knows? But I didn't like that. They could have cut all of the Harry Osborn stuff out. That actor was so damn annoying, dude. I'm sorry. Dane DeHaan, I didn't like him in this movie, dude. And I know he's been in other movies that he's better in, like Chronicle, but didn't like him in this film. So, again, there's things about this movie that I thought had so much potential, but ultimately, it's just not really a fun watch, except for the first, act. Like, the first, 45 minutes of this movie, I think, are fine. Then it just falls off a cliff, and it's unfortunate because there was potential here. So, No Way Home is coming out. I've already got reviews for Homecoming and Far From Home on this channel, so check those out, and let's see if No Way Home is a good Spider-Man film that can redeem not only Andrew Garfield. I mean, it's not about him, but let's see if they can give us a good film. Anyways, that's it. Have a great one. And what did you think about Amazing Spider-Man 2? Let me know in the comments. I'll talk to you soon.